Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Super Mania. I am your host, Catherine McCord, and today is going to be a little bit different episode because this episode is all about one extraordinary neurodiverse human and all the cool things that are going on in his life. And so I'm very excited to welcome him on. Please feel free to join us in using the comments, and we will answer any questions that you have. Also, I just want to take a minute to remind you what the show is about. So, Supermania is about neurodiversity and mental health. So, neurodiversity is very simply defined. It simply means that there is a medically visible and or diagnosable difference in how your brain processes information. You could also hear the term neurodivergent. And a few other terms as well, but it includes diagnoses such as dyspraxia, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, Tourette's, epilepsy, bipolar disorder, so on and so forth. So, just anything basically that makes you think a little bit differently. So, without further ado, I'd love to welcome on my guest today so he can tell you a little bit more about his thoughts on the subject. Let's go ahead and welcome in Mr. Kenneth Mims. Welcome, Kenneth.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining me. And where are you joining me from?
Actually, I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix,
Nice.
Arizona. Yeah, yeah. So,
In the desert. I like it.
yeah, we've been getting a lot of rain, so it's actually turning slightly green, which is a interesting
That's
thing to look.
unusual. Yeah.
When you look up in the mountains, it's
That's
a lot of
cool.
green. Yeah.
That's really cool. So tell us a little bit about you and what you do, which I think will explain a little bit more about why you're with us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to just share my story. But um, let's see, where should I start? I'm really, education expert. I've been in education for over 20 years. My bachelor's degree was in physics, and I transitioned into really STEM education. And somewhere down the line, I really just became passionate for individuals who are neurodivergent. So my story starts as a well, prior to my story, as a professional, a personal story, I think highlights really my pathway. When I was in high school, when I was in high school, I had a family member, that was just having some difficulties and actually, unfortunately, um, attempted to commit suicide at an early
Oh,
age.
no.
Yeah, and so at an early age, I was responsible for taking them to the hospital and just just going through that traumatic experience. But one thing from a family dynamic after that event took place, the family, we never talked about it ever again. And
Oh, okay.
well,
Hmm.
some families, that's when this aspect of mental health, every
Right.
yeah, yeah, every family
Right.
has their unique ways, and then also, different cultures have their,
Yes.
unique ways and
Real
social.
quick, I wanna ask about that because I get asked about this a lot,
Thank
about the cultural aspect of neurodiversity and mental health and how that kind of plays in. So, um, and if you don't mind me saying, I know you yourself are neurodivergent. So, um, and just as I am, how do you feel that the cultural aspect played into that incident and also just sort of your upbringing in general?
Yeah, so that's a good point, right? So the dynamics was kind of just, you know, sweep it under the rug, So, that was a moment in time where I started reflecting on as I got older, and looking at my neurodiversity or looking at aspects of, you know, my social emotional capacity or abilities or, you know, gaps. So it wasn't
Right.
until I started teaching in middle school, inclusion class, where I had students who were autistic, but I was introduced to the students as just, they were had, one particular student had a high level question, and it blew my mind. And then I had to find out who he was, what his disability was. So I was introduced to autism in a very positive way, where I saw the so-called superpowers.
That's
But
right.
I started studying autism, and I realized that the characteristics reminded me of myself while I was doing a master's degree program. Yeah, so that's a little bit of my story.
I think that's interesting how so many people go, they'll see it in somebody else, and all of a sudden go, wait a minute. Like this is making a little sense. I've been hearing so much of that from adults lately.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess I was going through different things in my life, but then I started studying the characteristics and the support strategies, support. And so the interventions that I learned for my students, I use for myself as far as really developing a greater emotional intelligence, self-regulation, and self-advocacy. So being able to
Yes.
communicate and figuring out ways, and then also certain alternative health strategies as well. Some different nutrients, some different toxins. So I just approached it from all angles, and
I love that. I talk about that a lot, that what you put into your body matters, right? So if your body chemistry is different, you're going to have different needs. And the same thing applies to what you put into your mind in terms of what you're viewing, what's going on. Um, Tactile support can be helpful for some people. For instance, for me, I have a whole drawer full back here of sensory objects so that if my mind starts to do things I don't want it to do, I can pull those out and use those as grounding exercises to kind of bring my mind back to doing
yeah,
what I need it to be doing and to focusing where I need it to focus. Um, right before the show, you and I talked about how each of us will kind of go down the rabbit hole and give it an opportunity, which is enjoyable, but sometimes not the most productive, right? So you have to have those tools to kind of bring yourself back to earth, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah. It's just a lot of key strategies, in different areas. But so my bachelor's degree was in physics, so a lot of it I just used to just blame it on just being scientists. Oh, the old saying is, everything is not rocket scientist. But I
Right.
thought like a rocket scientist. I thought like it, and because, but I didn't know any better. But as I got older, from a social standpoint, I said, oh wow,
Right
um,
there it is.
yeah. And then so I became so passionate that I decided to open up a nonprofit organization called Neurodiversity Education Research Center that operates and manages Science Prep Academy, which is a private middle school, high school, STEM school, college and career prep for kids who are neurodivergent. And
Which I think is amazing. I want to pause on that real quick. I think that's incredible. So you took this wonderful experience that you had with education and all that you put into being a good educator and really taking care of these kids, and you turned it into a school that would understand them better, which I really like. But I want to ask you real quick, because I've had other education experts on this show, and on my other show, Career Launch, as well. And one of the things they talk about is that there's nothing wrong with how these kids learn. In fact, most of them learn just fine. They just have to learn in a specific way. Is that what you found to be true?
um, well, the thing about it, yeah, you're right. But the thing about it is, it's just research-based strategies. Typically that you only see for what they call gifted students.
Right.
There's a whole pedagogy of like inquiry-based, constructivist-based, really nice and fun and powerful strategies, but only the kids and, gifted. But then there's this intersection between gifted and autism, meaning, autism is a social emotional developmental delay. So it's not
Right.
like it's a learning disability, but it's a learning disability based upon the social and emotional needs of a student.
Right.
But but you have a lot of kids who are gifted or unidentified gifted. So just using those strategies. But the biggest thing that we found really is this aspect of mental health. So being
Right.
a social emotional, thing that really transitions into mental health at an older
Absolutely.
age. At a younger age is behavior, but at an older age, that's mental health
I've
determines your
I've
behavior.
always thought, though, that people, and I've heard that a lot. So I want to get your thoughts on this, because I've heard this that, it starts as behavioral and moves to mental health. I think it is a mental health problem even when they're little. And it's just, it manifests as I'm being a naughty kid because that's all they know how to do, at that phase that they're kind of limited with their options. But it really, it strikes me as interesting because these kids are being asked to do things that are not natural to them. And then we're blaming them and putting labels on them, negative labels on them because they're not doing it. It's like that old adage of, you can't ask a fish to be a good horse.
Mm.
Like it doesn't work. That doesn't, if you have to work in a way that's natural to the mind. I've quoted some studies from Harvard and from that were published by Psychology Today talking about how the mind needs to work naturally, right? In a way that works naturally for it. So it sounds like that's what you're doing at your school, is allowing them to work in a way that's natural to their own minds.
Yeah, yeah, and I always say it's very difficult work. I would say probably the most difficult work at this moment in time, because you're talking about the evolution of, well, the way I look at it is it's the evolution of humanity. Meaning,
Absolutely.
humanity is evolving to a greater degree based on science. So, so these are social norms. So there's social norms for a horse, there's social norms for a fish, there's social norms for people, but it changes based upon your culture, your social, economic, different factors. And
Absolutely.
it changes over time, you know, and
Yeah.
we just know society is outdated, not to get
Yes.
into some of the things that we see, but I'm just being honest.
Please
And
do dive in. I want to hear it. What are some of the things that you see in your work?
listen, I mean, unfortunately, I have a friend who teaches in Virginia, Richmond, Newport News, Virginia, where there was an unfortunate shooting of a 6-year old shooting their teacher. All right,
Oh,
okay, so but we sweep these things under the rug, but this is a really an indication that there's something wrong with our society, with
yes.
the learning environment, which is this is supposed to be the a bubble,
Yeah.
supportive nurturing. So when we look at individuals who are neurodivergent or autistic, they're sensitive. They feel their environment. They're really in tune with their social environment, and then they may have some supports needs, whichever way you want to look at it. So with the population of neurodivergent students in today's society, there's they're going to be a fish out of water. They're
Yeah.
not going to want to be there. There's going
Yeah.
to be opposition. There's going to be fear, anxiety, trauma, stress. And then, how do you internalize this? How do you communicate this? But they're still children. So there's a mental health dynamics to, so, it's complex
It
and it's
is.
unfortunate.
It is. And I want to hit on that again because these little children, I mean, I work on the adult side of it, right? I work with them once they're out in their professional world. And it's hard enough for adults to manage this. And we're asking little children to do these things that aren't natural and to be in these stressful situations and to then be in these, have all these social expectations put on them. But I will say one of the extraordinary things that I've been witnessing is that younger people are being more attuned to this is just how this person is and that's okay. There seems to be a lot less social pressure as there's more understanding, which is very uplifting to me, right? Because that's the future of our society and how things and the future of our world. And so I'm hoping that as they get older, that kind of continues and that more compassion and generosity will be felt towards these people who are very capable humans. I've had people go, well, is it worth it? Or is it, do we really need this? Like, oh yeah, these are all the people innovating. And every successful entrepreneur out there right now that you can name is neurodivergent. So yes, this is what you want.
That's yeah. I mean, I started about 6, 7 years ago, and it's a different day and time. When I started, it was just something I saw coming from the physics community, meaning my professors, my grad students.
Right.
So if you look at people like Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Wozniak, you know, and other athletes, entertainers, celebrities,
Yep.
Einstein, like characteristics of analytical problem solving, thinking outside the box, thinking of things for a long period of time. These are things that resonated with me. So I had a passion for science, and this population had a passion for science. So we had a common love, and that's
Right.
what sparked this. But what's going on is that the corporate sector jobs, they have hiring programs of tens of thousands of jobs across the planet. Colleges, there's hundreds and hundreds of colleges across the planet. But there's this bottleneck that I call it, which is K-12 school systems, where they're just not aware that individuals that are neurodivergent or autistic have a potential to have a life, and it's just really
Right.
traumatizing them and holding them back from their potential. And so
It's true.
that's what we're
I
working with.
I talk about, my personal experience with autism a lot and the people in my life that have autism. And I always make the joke that I love autism so much that I married it. Um, but it's true. You see a lot of this, and I know tons. I mean, I can't even start to count the number of people I know that are successful and happy and productive humans that are neurodivergent. And I mean, a lot of people don't realize that when you add up all the data from like the CDC and different mental, health numbers and things like that, we're at somewhere about a third of the population, just shy of a third of the population has some sort of neurodivergence. And it could be different levels, right? And there's spectrums and all of these kinds of things. And I don't want to give the impression that there's not disability in the neurodiverse community. There absolutely is. 100% there is. But disability doesn't always mean what people think either, right? So people hear disabled and they think, oh, they can't do. But that's not true. You just have to do it in a different way, right? So are you seeing any kind of change or fluctuation with your students as they're as they're able to do things in a way that's natural for them, so that it's not a disability the way that people think of it? In other words, I can't do, I just need to do it a certain way. Is that something that you see?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to really Judy Singer, introducing the term neurodiversity.
Yep.
And then there's a neurodiversity celebration week that we got engaged with maybe last year was the first time. And so introducing the term to our students as early as sixth grade, so I've seen a difference with the students just using that term, where they're embracing it. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
neurodiverse, and it's just something positive. See,
Right.
yeah. So compared to a deficit thinking, I mean, it's a disability, but it's more of the what they call the framework. Is it a deficiency? Is it based upon, I can't do, are there positive aspects to it? So neurodiversity is a much more positive term, a much more
Yes.
embracing, differences. Yeah, I've seen a lot of growth just by using the difference of term. Because when I used to talk to people about autism with my students, I would honestly see most of the time a glaze that will come over individuals' eyes.
Yep. Yep.
Because I'm like, yeah, because we're doing, we got a college career program, they're going to vocational school, they're learning how to program, do robotics, blah, blah, and it's just, so I said, wow, like when you use that term autism, it's just depend upon the individual, and the majority of individuals just don't know the full
They
spectrum
don't.
of a
They
particular.
don't. And they also misunderstand what it is. I've figured out. And this weird idea, and by the way, I want to put this out there. This was never proven. In fact, it's been debunked that autism is caused by vaccines. Not a thing.
Yeah.
Science has said, that's not it. Um, One thing that's interesting to me that I feel like, and this is something I've used a lot when I'm doing speeches and education to adults, is to talk about how the autism gene or genes found in people with autism that cause that mutation are linked to the same genes that move humanity forward in a positive manner evolutionarily. And so the same things making us progress in a positive way are the same things that are mutating and causing autism, the same genes. And it's very interesting. So when you were talking earlier about human evolution, it is very interesting because it's linked. And now there are scientists, and not just with autism, but other neurodiversities as well, that are coming out and saying, well, hold on, there may be a reason we're seeing more and more of this. Our genes may be going, this is actually what we need now, because we're not in the hunter-gatherer state anymore. We're in a more intellectual state of being. So I'm curious your thoughts on those scientists that say things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I just picked it up as far as the evolution of humanity. Meaning, and I went back to the unfortunate circumstances of our current learning environment.
Right.
But what are we going to do as a society? What are we going to do from an educational standpoint? Either we're going to have compassion and love, for our students, our future generations, our children, our society, and say, hey, something needs to be done. We need to rethink how we're educating, our students, our students who are neurodivergent, but it's at the end of the day, they're our students, they're our kids, they're our
Yeah.
community. So what are we going to do? Are we just going to keep trying to put this, circle in this square peg? Are we going to step back and say, hey, and that's why I mentioned the aspect of like shootings,
Right.
because
Yeah.
that's something's wrong when we're having a conversation about should teachers be armed with weapons. And I don't want to get into that like
It's
political
sad.
conversation, but I'm just highlighting that's where we're at as a humanity. Right? And so kids are growing up in that, and meaning all kids can't deal with that. Kids
Right.
need another multiple choice, like so what that's so what that's doing. So for us, we created a a a micro school. So our school is what's called a micro school. It's about 20 kids. So we created a micro school network, so other people across the nation can use the model. But this a micro school is really an evolution uh, of,
Right.
of, of education, where you see the parents. Initially it was parents who, particularly moms, who were homeschooling their child, but then there was another child, their friend's child, or down the street. Hey, come on! They
Right.
basically like a den, like Cub Scouts or something like that, where you maybe have 5 to 10. But that model is you're going to see that grow because we're being forced to, hey, this is not safe, this is not appropriate. So
Right.
I do anticipate just more innovation, more just creative solutions to you know to come about within the next year
Oh
and
yeah.
beyond.
Oh yeah, I see some cool things coming down the work. I have the pleasure of doing work with the octopus movement, and
Oh
we're
yeah.
working on some great stuff right now for kids, which I will be reaching out to you about, by the way. But there's some really cool projects, ideas, evolutions of education, evolutions of how we think about things, right, and how we understand different things. Just like with mental health, it used to be, oh, you're different, let's lock you in a loony bin. Then it was, oh, you're different, you're just eccentric, and that was a thing for a while. And everybody just kind of rolled with it. And now, and then it went back to the locking you up kind of thing. And it's kind of gone back and forth. But now that we really have the science behind it, we can understand it. I'm seeing so much more positive movement, um, in those types of fields, and with children too, because some things don't evolve until later. So for instance, I have bipolar 1 that didn't come out till I was older. I didn't have that as a child. That's not a thing. But some of my other neurodiversities were very, very present when I was a child, and maybe it just wasn't quite picked up on, or that kind of thing. But one thing I encourage parents to do is pay attention to your children. Really watch them. I think I see a lot of parents that just kind of skip over things. They blow off things that their kids do. Watch them. Watch them. First of all, they're smarter than you think. They're fascinating little humans. And you'll start to understand more about them when you ask them why, and when you talk to them about what's going on. You should, as a parent, you should catch if your child has obsessive compulsive disorder, or you should catch if your child is on the spectrum, or you should catch if they have ADHD. Um, just watch them and observe them. What are some things that you see in terms of the difference that it makes when a parent is involved and cares versus a child that's maybe not been paid too much attention to?
Oh, we. Oh, that's a that's a that's $1 million question right there. You know, because it goes back first of all to the story that I shared as far as a family member, who attempted suicide, and that was at an early age, and I said it was swept under the rug. But as I got older, I noticed that that family member and other family members, cousins, uncles, you know, individuals that are peers of mine age-wise, but then the previous generation, as far as my parents, brothers and sisters, they had characteristics of neurodiversity or autism or mental health, needs,
Right. Right.
right? So this aspect of, you know, but looking at it, I saw that the family just did not have the capacity. They didn't have the capacity because within families, you have different capacities based upon social
Very
economic.
true.
So what I realized in advocating for mental health supports to my students is that I started looking at certain social economic communities don't embrace mental health support and needs, the same. Particularly higher socioeconomic communities are more, um, uh, they're more acceptable, or they have access to mental health support. I'm reading this
Right.
good book right now that just shows that, you know, and there's some issues, particularly like financial, because, you know, from a mental health standpoint, certain communities have more mental health practitioners, and it's based
Yes.
upon, like,
Yes.
Massachusetts has a higher rate of like hundreds per, like thousands more.
It's
That,
true.
you know, compared to
Yeah.
lower. And when you start talking about individuals who are lower socioeconomic, there's a higher chance that they're going to be getting their mental health support from public outlets, many people who are unfortunately are incarcerated, like you're saying,
Right.
that the incarceration system now, since like you said before, it has transitioned from facilities and large hospitals, institutions, and now the in jails are actually the largest providers of mental health at this
Which,
time.
how scary is that? That that's really, and I have a whole other spiel about our incarceration system that I'm not going to get into for this
Yeah, yeah,
show, but
right.
um, that would just kind of derail us a little bit. But it really, it is scary when you stop and think about how few resources, especially certain, economic groups and regional areas too, that can be very much a thing. Um, and when you go outside of the United States, there are, where both of us are located, there are entire countries that don't have mental health resources.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
you have to stop and think how damaging that is, and how very difficult. And so one thing that I think is very important is to start letting parents know there's nothing wrong with your child if they need to go see somebody. It's just like going to see a doctor. It's just like going to see a doctor. You're just going to check up on some things, see how some things are going with somebody who has some expertise that mommy and daddy just don't have. And
right.
that's okay. I have superb parents, glorious parents. I have some of the best parents I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And I brag about them all the time. And they still took me to a counselor because their knowledge stopped at a certain point. And so they needed, especially once the bipolar started manifesting, they needed help. And
yeah,
so they took me and they got me the help. And I just think back about how important that is. And then we need the resources available. That's the other thing. It's not just about want, you've got to have the resources available and make them affordable. Because I'm sorry, not everybody has $100 an hour or
and that's
more.
yeah more. That's what I was going to say, because because even within the school setting, you're right. In the school setting, it's been difficult to really figure it out because it's a whole different business model. Meaning, if you look at teacher salaries, and we always argue about teachers, advocate for teacher salaries. But when you start talking about mental health practitioners and psychologists, I mean, their billable rate is, $100,
Obscene.
150, 250. So that business model, that billable rate, does not integrate within education at this time. So
No.
if and so what I realize is when you look at early age milestones for autism, like occupational therapy, speech therapy, ABA, these are known
Oh, yeah.
therapeutic solutions. But when you start talking about the young adult milestones for individuals who are neurodivergent or autistic, it's mental health, it's counseling. But there's no question conversation about what are the appropriate therapies for young adult milestones for individuals who are neurodivergent. This is something that's totally not even talked about, but it's mental health. And
It
and there's
is.
no reason why mental health support shouldn't be a standard therapy just as much as OT speech or ABA is for the younger milestones. The mental health has to
100%.
be in schools. They have to
Yes.
be in schools, but they're not there. But you're right, and but what you're saying as far as the parents, like yeah, my heart goes out to parents. I've worked with them day in day out. I've seen it, So um,
Yeah. Oh,
don't
it's
worry.
true, but
Yeah,
I love that you hit on that. Schools have to get better, and I've seen some of that. There are areas in which
yeah.
schools are starting to really pick up on the mental health aspect, but not everywhere. And we do have a question for you. It says, as we wrap up, it says, "Hi Kenneth, I'm an aspiring social entrepreneur and am autistic myself. I also hope to lead an enterprise that creates greater opportunities for the neurodiverse community." Good for you, Edwin. What has been the hardest challenges in growing NERC and Science Prep Academy?
What has been the hardest challenge? Uh, that's a good question. I, you know, I really can't say it's been really many hard challenges. Besides just me growing as a leader, as an organizational leader. You have to just assess your weaknesses and strengths and see what
Right.
type of professional development that you need. But also, I would say, that's a good question. I'll just say, if you're neurodivergent, right, you're going to have some gaps. You're going to have some strengths, but you're going to have some gaps, and those gaps may manifest in the form of communication, um, possibly, or whatever else it is. So you have to identify that. So for me, I would say this year I'm really focused on doing a better job, with communication. Um,
Yeah.
and because sometimes when you're a visionary and you have a vision, you can kind of, particularly if you're neurodivergent, I'm saying sometimes you can kind of go in your own mind and you can kind of like live there, right? Which is great to get great ideas and great inspiration and insights. But when you're leading a team, when you're leading an organization, when you have people, supporting you, you know, there's a balance, where you have to be able to make sure that you come back, check in, make sure your team is doing well, make sure they're supported, and make sure that you're achieving your organizational goals. And if not, then you have to figure out and then creating those systems. So
Yeah.
I would say that's probably the biggest thing.
And that's kind of true for any entrepreneur, right? You have to learn your weaknesses, find people to help fill those gaps, move forward. Funding can always be fun too. But um, we are done with the show for today, but please connect with Kenneth. He's an extraordinary human. Lots of interesting things going on. Feel free to connect with me as well. Follow the Octopus Movement. It's the octopusmovement.org. Very exciting stuff coming down the pipeline there. We're also looking for some volunteers for some very cool educational based projects that we have coming up. So definitely reach out. As for the show, same time, same place next week. More topics about neurodiversity. Thank you so much for being with us, Kenneth. What is your final sentence of wisdom for everybody? Your final words of wisdom?
Share your story. Share your story. If you're directly, indirectly impacted by neurodiversity, autism, share your story. No longer do you need to stay in the dark and just hold it to yourself. But there's people out there that will be able to take that wisdom, take those experience, and use it, to get them over their hurdle and point them in the right
100%.
direction.
Find your tribe. They are out there. They will support you. And with that, everybody, have a lovely week. Be great.